The United States ranked 14% as a world power in financial literacy. So I believe it's become a financial literacy crisis in America. And I don't think the private and the public sector are really doing anything about it and more or less ignoring the problem.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smarter Money Show. My name is Vlad Sherbatov, and we have a special guest on the show today. She is a certified financial planner with over 3 decades of experience. She's the CEO of her investment management and financial planning firm called Cinergy Financial, and she is the author of this book called Redefining Financial Literacy, which was just published in April of 2021. We're very excited to have on the show today. Please welcome Cindy Couyoumjian.
Thank you so much for having me today, Vlad.
It's an absolute pleasure. And Cindy, you just published this book, and it has already become a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It took you 3 years to write this book, but you've actually been doing this over the past 30 years. You've been raising awareness of financial literacy and helping people make smarter financial decisions. Why is this topic such a big passion of yours?
I think because in today's world, and based on the research I did for this particular book, I believe, and Alan Greenspan just said this a few years ago, that the number one problem in America is financial literacy, with especially the younger generation coming up. You know, the United States ranked 14% as a world power in financial literacy. So I believe it's become a financial literacy crisis in America. And I don't think the private and the public sector are really doing anything about it and more or less ignoring the problem.
So, why do you think it's become such a problem? Is it because nobody is having the conversation? There's not enough motivation? What do you think is at the source of it?
I think the pinpoint of the problem comes in our educational system. There's only 6 states in the United States that require a full year of financial awareness as a course. And you think about it, we go to school, we learn about English, math, science every year, right? But where's the finance piece? There's no class that's consistent and that can help people comprehend and attain the level of financial awareness they need. Since the subject is so broad, you really need repetition. And if you only hear about it once and you have a class in high school, you certainly can't take that one class and bring it into your adult life and your working life and execute what you've learned. So I think a lot of it has to do with the educational system, as well as the financial service industry doesn't really spend a lot of their budget educating Americans today. I mean, the research said they spend 3% educating, and a lot of their money goes to marketing products. So investors are left with feeling a little bit insecure and uncertainty, and almost even shameful and anxious about not knowing financial knowledge.
It's funny you bring up the classes as math and science and so on and so forth, because to me, financial literacy and financial health is not very different from physical literacy and physical health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
physical fitness is also a very broad subject, but we go to school and we take the gym class and
Oh,
we learn
yeah. Good point.
the fundamentals of it. Like, we may not learn every single thing you can do as an athlete, but you will learn how to stretch, right? And how to
Yep.
do a push up and how to do a sit up, and those basic, maybe 8 exercises that are enough to really keep you above water pretty much the rest of your life, right? If you're not going to be a professional athlete. So I find it interesting that there must be some fundamental skills that you can acquire at a very early young age and have that repetition. Maybe it's things like budgeting. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
things like managing a small sum of money and splitting it up between your main expenses. And most importantly, having the discipline to execute, a plan, even on a small scale. It's strange to me that it hasn't been a priority. And people have been taking it into their own hands now to educate themselves, in many ways leaning on resources such as your book, the
Mm-hmm.
internet and social media. Like, do you think that outside of the educational system, there is enough information now for people to educate themselves and take those steps on their own?
I think action steps is great in the engagement process, but I also think a little bit of the problem in the financial literacy crisis we have today is the digital age. People have access to information, okay? But the question is, how do you decipher information into knowledge and execute it in your own personal situation? With the digital age, you can pretty much Google anything today to agree with what you're thinking. So I think it comes down to having a financial professional, and I also like to call I don't like the word financial planner as much as I like today financial coach. Someone who is going to motivate you and inspire you to set your goals, monitor those goals, and make sure you stay engaged and accountable. Because, a lot of people hire an advisor and say, well, you do it, and I don't really need to know anything about it. You're the expert. I think that is a missing component in my industry, sitting in this business over 35 years. I don't think investors are engaged enough. Maybe because they don't know about the subject and they feel a little insecure and intimidated. So they prefer just to throw it off to the advisor. And that's fine, but I think the engagement process needs to be not only with the financial advisor and the coach, because we are just here to guide you, motivate you, and structure your goals and objectives. Investors need to know what questions to ask. So, how do you ask questions? You get educated because knowledge is power. And that's how the wealthy elites have made so much money. They've taken the time to get engaged, to learn, to ask questions, and to be curious. And it's not that you need to be the expert, but you need to be engaged enough to know what questions to ask.
What would you say are some of the top questions that a starting out investor perhaps should seriously contemplate and ask?
Well, as I talk about in my book, investors need to think of financial literacy in two themes. The first is what you mentioned earlier, basic financial concepts. And I call that micro. And there's tons of books out there, Susie Orman, David Ramsey. There's a lot of books that people can pick up and spend 5 minutes a day and use those resources to build an emergency fund because a lot of people were caught off guard with COVID. Set up a budget and reduce your debt. So that's the one theme of the book that I really don't go into deep because there's so many books out there. What I have found when I was doing research about the macro side of financial literacy, there were no books out there, zero. So I know that this contribution to the financial industry that I've made with me and Dr. Georgie, my collaborator, my researcher, is a book that investors need to get engaged with. What political and economic forces are creating part of the crisis, not only the financial literacy crisis, but the retirement crisis today, and how they can fight those forces. Because that comes down to your investment choices you make, whether that be stocks or bonds or other asset classes. So I want to introduce the macro piece of financial literacy and explain things that people hear about every day on TV and have someone put it all together for them in the last 50 years and what's happened in the past that's going on today that will affect your future, and how can you use that information to build a sustainable investment strategy that can sustain you without fear based on facts and leave a legacy for your loved ones. So that was the motivation in giving that information to the public.
So, if I'm hearing correctly, it's not just the micro aspects that define your financial well being, but there are macro forces that are often beyond our control, maybe always outside of our
Perfect.
control, that have a huge impact on that.
I mean, you said it picture perfect. Micro, you can control how much you save, how much you budget, how much debt you accumulate. Macro are things you can't control. So this 60-40, the stock and bond model that investors have depended on for decades, based on my PhD, if you will, I wrote a thesis in my book. I don't want to call it PhD thesis,
Right.
but it was enough research to be able to create awareness. Is a stock and bond model the best strategy for my money over the next 5, 10, and 20 years? And my analogies and my analysis is, in my opinion, I don't think it's enough.
Mhm.
And so if it's not enough, what should I be learning about? I mean, I'm so proud of Canada. Canada got the first ETF in cryptocurrency. I'm like, why did the USA? Of course, they're probably Goldman Sachs has applied for an ETF just a couple of weeks ago. But Canada was the innovators of establishing the first ETF in Bitcoin and Ethereum. I applaud you guys.
Purpose Financial, is that the one you're referring to?
I don't know the exact name of the ETF in Canada. I was reading
Right.
about it that about, I think 2 months ago, they created the Bitcoin ETF and then the
Yes.
Ethereum. And the reason I bring that up, and I will write about it in my book 3, because book 2 is going to the printer, Feminine Courage, and then book 3, The Retirement Crisis in America. So I write 3 long chapters on crypto, when it was first talked about in 1903 by an Australian economist, and how it's evolved today. And I'm not suggesting with this interview today that people go buy Bitcoin and Ethereum. What I am suggesting, though, that this is possibly a new asset class in the future. So investors need to learn about different asset classes, whether it be commercial real estate, private credit, commodities, whatever that might be. But I do believe the future of the financial service sector will embrace these asset classes in the future.
Like exactly what you said, people have access to so much more information now. And I think we need to also be careful with which sources we
Yes.
explore, right? Because not all information is created equal. And now, like we're at this intersection of financial services industry and even financial advice, which is highly regulated, and social media and Gen Zs and content creators and financial influencers who are extremely free and unregulated. And our span for attention is very, very low. So it's very easy to see how there will be scenarios where people are exposed to information that is, clickbaity and inflated, and for a very short amount of time, and it might give you a very false sense of confidence or knowledge that's actually may not be there. What do you think about that?
That's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a new psychology term that people, because of information, are using it to make decisions that inflate the ability for them to see the true facts. Because, people are overconfident right now in some aspects of money management because they have access to information. They think they know more than the average advisor. I mean, believe it or not, I know because I have people walk through my front door every day. And in the last 5 years, as people have lost trust in the banking system, they've lost trust in the financial service industry. They come in and they think they're financial experts. And that is definitely dangerous. I mean, I spent 15 years getting 8 security licenses in a CFP. Okay. So for someone to walk in my office and think they know more than I do, I really fear the investors that are doing it themselves today. And that's why the sooner I can disseminate this information, that's quite different than a regular book on financial literacy. I think the more I can equip the investor to reach out to a professional.
So I want to go back to the macro forces because I understand that it's a very deep topic.
It
But
is.
just for the purposes of somebody watching this, can you give us a little bit of context of what these forces may be? Because your book title itself is talking about unlocking hidden forces. I don't know if they're the same forces necessarily, but it talks about this hidden, mysterious things that are happening out there that maybe a lot of us don't understand. Can you just give us a little glimpse of what that is?
Yes, I will. My book 3 is going to be a deep dive, an economic ideology that created a retirement crisis in America. So you're going to get a deep dive. Book 1, chapter 1 took me a year to write because it was so complex. I went back 120 years and tried to parallel the Gilded Age 1.0 to designate today the Gilded Age 2.0. And what do I mean by that? Hidden forces are broken into 2 buckets, I believe, both economic and political. Okay. So I don't want to get too deep here, but I want to give you enough content. These forces have an effect on our money. They have an effect on our sustainability. They have an effect on our retirement. So if you're not taking the time to look at these hidden forces could hurt you not knowing. Okay. So you want me to talk about these 2 hidden forces? Let me break it down really simple, economic and political. And then let's do a subset
Sure.
so you can stay with me. When I say the word political, it's usually related to politicians and our tax system and the Federal Reserve. Because I think taxes and the Federal Reserve play into risks, hidden forces that affect us today. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Economic. Let me break that down into two: deregulation and free markets, allowing corporations to make their decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Those forces, when you give all the power to corporate America and take the power away from government, and I'm a big capitalist, by the way, but when capitalism is swayed one way, too far to the right or too far to the left, and capitalism becomes, in my opinion, ineffective because of these forces, both taxes on the political side and the Federal Reserve over here, and economics giving control to corporate America by reducing the rules and regulations. That is a recipe for fraud and greed. And we all know that, and inequality. So those three things come out of that. When you have fraud and you have greed and you have inequality, it affects you and I. It affects our money. It devalues the money when the Federal Reserve comes in and has to print money, right? When low tax rates make the rich richer. I heard in an article just, Mr. Bezos had a salary of 81,000. So how does those rich people pay less taxes than us Americans that make 150,000? So the tax system in the Federal Reserve is used, unfortunately, against the middle. Okay. And then you have greed and corruption by corporate America to bend the rules so they can make more money, because the economic ideology is make most money for the shareholders, which are the owners, by doing buybacks, lowering interest rate and taxes. And then we get into this cycle that gets out of control, which we have today, which took 50 years to get here, from the 1970s to today. So how do you unravel that? You unravel that by giving the information to these kids in elementary school and high school and in college. Because if you don't educate them on hidden forces, how are they going to change our future? Mm-hmm. This isn't taught in college. My collaborator, Dr. Georgie, has a son who went to USC, econ major, right? He read about these forces that really aren't in book 1, will be in book 3. He says, I never learned this. I'm a 4.0 student at USC, and I never was told these things. Mm-hmm. So if we want to change our world and change the new future of politicians and economists, then we must educate them on the choices that past leaders made and how it affected us, social issues in America. That's my passion. How to help the people that have been squeezed down because of political and economic forces. And I have a whole new other dissertation, how that has affected the retirement, our pensions, our Social Security, and the 60-40 model. Because I believe that those hidden forces, and no one in the industry is talking about it, has affected our pensions, our Social Security, and our 60-40 model that we have depended on for decades. And I don't just want to write a book about problems. There's hundreds of books on macroeconomic problems, but no one has a solution. And I'm not saying my book has a solution. I'm saying my book has a shield for you. And that shield is knowledge and education. And if you put that shield on, and you take the time and the action steps to get educated, not only with your personal finances, but for the future generations to come, that's when change can come. And that's my motivation.
And if you do get a good understanding of these macro forces, and you do the deep dive and you read the book inside and out, and your future iterations as well, how does that manifest itself into your decision making? Let's say that an average investor can now approach their investing decision, whether it's for retirement or building wealth.
Excellent question, Vlad. There has been institutions across this country and very wealthy people that have beat the stock market the last 30 years. And I talk about it in my book. And strategies, investment strategies that they had and we didn't, are available today. I think today more than ever, it took me 17 years to build this realm model, trial and error and evolution. I think investing is so exciting today because my realm model stands for the retail which is you and I, endowment allocated like model, something Yale's been doing for 35 years with David Swanson, beating the S&P 500, less risk and more income. And if it's good enough for Yale and the products are here for us, it's good enough for Americans to start the process of getting engaged, getting educated, and start asking your financial planner questions about other asset classes.
And these asset classes that are on top of the typical stock and bond, what are those?
Oh, you asked some big, deep questions. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to give you
Just
basic.
exactly.
I'm going to give you commercial real estate, not going out and buying homes, engaging in an institutional commercial real estate fund that might buy storage and industrial and apartments that you can buy into a fund that will pay you a yield more than your bank account or more than the 10-year treasury or more than a high yield bond fund, that you can get a yield, get some tax benefits, and not have a significant volatility factor. So that's one asset class. Number two, you can bring in private credit, which was not available for retail clients to 2009. Okay, so these are new products that have evolved that allows you to buy into funds that are non-traditional banks who lend money to companies with the pretense of senior secured debt, which means if that company doesn't pay, we're going to put collateral on an asset so we get our money. Okay. And those kind of yields are higher than banks, higher than the 10-year treasury. Mm-hmm. So seniors are thinking, where am I going to get yield? Do I got to go buy? I mean, I read an article recently and people are buying rentals to get yield. What a pain in the butt. That's a lot of work to get a yield because they can't get it at the bank. They can't get it in the bond market. And they're desperately looking. The strategies are out there for you folks. It's just getting engaged. And I talk about only two in my book because I don't want to overwhelm. I talk about commercial real estate and private credit. I don't really talk about commodities or crypto. I will be doing that in future books or venture capital. Mm-hmm. But there are those asset classes too that you can add to the equation with an experienced advisor who understands alternative investments.
You talk about financial engagement, right? And specifically, clearly there is a bit of a gap in terms of financial literacy, and that goes across the entire population. But within that subset, there is another gap, and that one is between men and women. And in fact, you mentioned in your book that for some time, women have been, in your opinion, more or less of passive bystanders and observers when it comes to managing finance. And it's time to change that. And I wanted to ask specifically, why is it that now more than ever, it's really important for women to be more engaged and more involved in financial management and really take control over their financial health and financial long-term well-being?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. And the first that comes to mind are the 3Ds: death, disability, and divorce. When women are going to live longer than men, 50% of marriages end up in divorce. And if your spouse becomes disabled, that's the breadwinner or potentially the person who manages your finances. Women need to really step up, because when I have a client who's, let's say, and most men manage the money, but women are taking on a more active role in the last decade. But if something happens to your spouse and then you're responsible to pay the bills and manage the investments, as you never attended one of your meetings, there's so many factors. Taxes is an issue, lack of proper decision making. So I call it the 3Ds. The second thing is women score 18% of financial literacy tests, which men score in the 30s. So they have half the knowledge of men. And then third, the research says in the next 10 years, 2/3 of all the wealth and 95% of the decisions that are being made in families are going to be the responsibility of the women. When I hear those alarming statistics that women are going to manage 2/3 of the wealth in this country in the next 10 years, and they're going to make 95% of the decisions, I get nervous. It scares me. See, women don't care as much about volatility as men, based on my research. Their biggest fear is not knowing. So I believe over the next 10 years, this financial revolution I call Feminism 4 in my book too, is for women to get engaged, start learning, get rid of those emotions of shame, isolation, anxiety when it comes to money, and just move forward, because it will be such a detriment to women with the responsibility that's coming in the next 10 years not to get involved. And women think, oh, I'm not smart enough. I let my husband do it. Hey, listen, there's more PhDs and masters that are women graduating. It's just an excuse because women don't have the time. And I get it. They got families, they're working, but they must make the time. Because if not, I know women want equality in wages today. And if they want equality in wages today, they must be equipped with financial literacy to get what they want for future generations to come.
Can you repeat again the statistic about the...
Okay, so 2/3 of women will be managing the wealth in America. Right now, they manage 52%. It's going to go up into the 70s, okay? And the research also says that women are going to be making about 95% of the financial decisions in their household. And you have this 50% of our population that are not equipped for this responsibility, which is alarming. And a lot of it is because I'm writing this book on feminine courage. It's been generations and generations of marginalization of women. And women lack the confidence, they lack the know-how that when you use the word financial literacy, women sort of like curl up. It's a topic they know they need to get engaged with, but they're trying to delay it as far out into the future as they can.
I wanted to talk about for somebody who's just starting out, right? Let's say somebody is looking into this and saying, yeah, I wasn't always, I wasn't taught this before. Maybe money hasn't been an important or a dominant subject at the dinner table, but
Yep.
I want to start taking control into my own hands. What do I do? Like, where do I get started? What do you answer to that type of question?
You know, I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I moved to Southern California. I was 23 years old with a couple thousand in my checking account, which I evaporated after a couple of months. So these are some of the things, being in the financial service industry right out of college. I mean, at 20 some years old, I don't have a lot of experience. So let me tell you practical steps that I did that helped me attain the success I attained over my 35 years in the business. So the first thing I thought about it, it's like, okay, I work 40 to 50 hours a week. I have to pay myself first. I'm always going to have debt. I have my student loans, I got my car payment. So I really got into this a frame of mind of saying, okay, this is my income. This is how much I'm saving as a percentage of my income. And whether I could save 5 or 10% to get started, it starts with a commitment, emotional commitment. And then the second step, so you see yourself saving, I remember way back, $50 a month. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot of money. Okay. But I've amassed a lot of wealth with this $50 a month. Okay. So I started with my $50 a month. And then every year I put together a simple yellow pad of what my assets were. Why? Because it's all psychological. It's like a diet. If you think about it, you won't do it. But if you write about it and you see and you have something motivating you to keep going. So it's as simple as starting with 5 to 10% of your income, writing down all your expenses. That doesn't, a young person doesn't have, I mean, they have expenses, but it's not going to be like 2 pages long. Okay. It's, again, emotional and psychological. It's preparing your mind and your action steps with baby steps for something much bigger in the future. So starting saving and paying yourself first. So you can pay yourself first in a short term, medium term, or long term. I said, okay, I got to put so much in my long term I can't touch. I need to build an emergency fund because after moving to California, within 3 months, my 5,000 was gone. Okay. So I knew I had to have that emergency fund set up. That became my number one goal because budgeting and emergency fund go hand in hand. You know what you're spending, you know what's coming in, and then you know how much is going into your savings bucket. Now, at first, I couldn't start a savings program. My mom says, good. My mom, dad, good. Come back home. You don't need to go to California. Yes, I'm going to stay here. So I got a second job. Okay. And I remember one of my clients showed up. I was serving Mexican food. They go, oh, you're serving burrito? Oh, I'm helping out a friend. So I was working there almost 6 months. When my client walked in, I actually went in the back and says, I'm done here. That was my last day of my second job, but I was able to save enough money to build that emergency fund. And then from there, I opened up my 401k plan because that's long term. So I got my short term emergency fund. Now I got my long term. And as time went on, and I got married at 28, I knew it was time to buy a house. I didn't have a lot of money, so I started somewhere. I told my husband, we got $3,000. We can buy a condo. Oh, yeah, let's go look at them. So, I mean, it was little bits of money that turned into enough to put a down payment on a condo. And then we bought a townhome, and then we bought a home. So how long did that take me? My daughter was born in 1993. I moved out to California in 87. So it was a period of 6 years. We went from a condo to a townhome. And then by the time my son was born in 2000, we went to our home and hit the jackpot. Okay. Bought a house for 200. Within 5 years, it was $2.5 million. Okay. So it was the $97,000 condo in Rancho Santa Margarita that we lost 50% the day I bought the place. Okay. And we had to sit in this 500 square feet house for 3 years when my husband has big arms because he works out. And we had to share this little mirror. I'm like, move over. But it was that stepping stone from $50 to 10% of my income, to my condo, to my townhome, to my home. Now, I wish I had a financial coach. Why? Because if I would have saved all three properties, I sold one, bought another one. You know, those were times that I needed a financial coach, somebody who had more experience than me. Because I made my own financial mistakes that if I would have had all three homes, I'd have millions of dollars in equity today. But again, experience is something, you know, these people on this TikTok, I can't even tell you what that's worth. And, you know, I sit across the table and I have 35 years, a CFP, 8 security license, dedicated half my career life just to education. You would think people would be phoning me with the phone ringing off the hook and writing books. It's not happening. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're getting calls in. The public is polarized. People lack trust. They don't know who to turn to. And I think these young people who are building a name or thought leaders in the financial industry see this huge gap, and they're trying to fill the gap with information and knowledge for the end user. So don't be scared. Reach out, hire a professional, hire a coach, someone who, hey, how many years of experience? You got 1 year? Well, I don't know if I'll be talking to you anytime soon. You know, we made mistakes. I'm not going to tell you as an expert in my industry, or I can't even use the word expert, as a CFP in my industry, that I didn't make mistakes. That's how we learn with money, unfortunately, since we were given no educational upbringing in our school systems. Yeah, you may have a parent who've taught you something and who put you on a right track for budgeting and saving. But we didn't have the tools and the skills all of us needed, whether I was a professional or not in the industry. We all needed that in the early years of our educational process.
You know, motivation is such a big thing. Like financial health, it has those two components to it. One is the literacy, the information part. You need to know what a budget is, how to go about these things. But the second, and I think even more important piece, what you mentioned, is the mindset, like the motivation to execute these things. And because we live in such a world of instant gratification, we see people with big houses and
Yeah.
fancy cars, but we don't see the 25 years it may have taken that person to get there, the ups and downs on their journey towards there. So something like putting away $50 towards something that may be accumulating into wealth 10, 15, 20, even more years down the line just doesn't seem so exciting. And unfortunately, what happens as a result is, for too many of us, the catalyst towards more attention to finance comes from our own mistakes, just like you said. And for me, it was a very similar situation. I was working as a teenager. I got access to credit very early. So in my late teens and my early 20s, probably about the age of your son right now, at that time, I was making terrible financial decisions. I was living beyond my means. I didn't have any sense of what am I going to do 3 years from now? What am I building for the future? I was accumulating debt. And it took me probably a good stretch of 6, 7, 8 years of that to come back and reset and
Oh,
start
good.
making adjustments right in my mid 20s, so that now I'm able to have a family and I have two small children of my own that
Oh, congratulations.
that I'm thinking of now. What am I going to do for them to make sure that they are not only well educated in finance, but well motivated from an early age to make those right moves? So I'm curious, you as a parent, what do you tell your son about managing finance?
Oh gosh, I definitely talked about money as early as the credit crisis, which was '08, and I think my daughter was 11 years old. This was a time and an opportunity to talk about budgeting, and we're on a budget. We're going to only spend X amount of money for dinner tonight. You guys pick a place. So I got them involved with some of the decision making. And I always talked about putting X amount of money you got to save for your future. My daughter, now she's 23. She's at Berkeley and she's a minimalist. She can afford clothes. She buys clothes at the Salvation Army. I go, Claire, really? She goes, Mom, you taught me. She goes, I'm not going to live your lifestyle with a big home, the nice cars.
Right.
I want to travel. I want to save. So, especially my daughter or a child that lives through a tough time in your financial life, it's incredibly impressionable. Use bad financial situations to teach your children, not to hide it from them, but explain the mistakes you make and good things you would have done. I talk to my children on all the mistakes I've made and said, listen, if I would have done it this way, or I had this, or I would have done it this way. That is how you teach your kids. You teach your children based on the financial mistakes you make. Because if they don't see you making mistakes, how can they avoid it? And that's the advice I give a parent today.
And how early would you have those conversations?
Well, again, I think the time that they can sort of understand, and like I said, my daughter, she was in first grade, second grade. I wanted to make impressions on them and explain to them as early as I could, hey, listen, we bought too many homes, we accumulated too much debt. These are the consequences. I must fix the problem and not make that mistake twice. It's okay in the money business. I don't care. Make a mistake. Try to make, no, don't say try to make a mistake. Avoid making mistakes. I always tell my children, avoid making the mistakes by learning where I made the mistakes. So you guys have 10 to 20 years on me. Okay. Oh my, you have that much more. Well, it's not about the money. It's about the decision making of what you're going to do with the money. Because when you don't have any money, I tell my son, Kobe, I named my son after Kobe Bryant. I go, Kobe, when you don't have any money, you don't have any temptation. But when the money and you save that $50 and all of a sudden you got 10,000, a friend brings a stock trade to you, you might be open to taking a gamble. That's when you have to put the reins on. Your mind works in two ways. It's logical and it's emotional. So it's impulsive. So you have to step back, like everyone getting the stimulus check, $1,000. Everyone wants to go spend it. No, take 20%, reward yourself and save the rest. You got to play games with your mind when it comes to money, or have a team behind you. I don't care if that's a friend or a spouse or a financial planner, someone you can share your financial ideas with and see if they're either logical or emotional. And that's how I try to explain it.
Did you actually name your son after Kobe Bryant?
Yeah, believe it or not, my daughter was born on Kobe Bryant's birthday, August 23rd. I was at a Laker game. My husband's name's Harry. And my husband goes, don't name our son Harry. I go, who's that guy down there? He's a good basketball player. Someone said his name's Kobe. I go, okay, I love that name, Kobe. And my son finally told me in high school, oh, I love my name, Mom. My friends love to call me Kobe. Anyways, yes, his name's Kobe. Kobe. I spelled it exact. My mother-in-law didn't. She was like, what did you name your son after? A basketball player for? I'm like, I think he's a good player. And of course, I saw talent back then. He
That's
was in the league only 2 to 3 years. So
Oh my, that's incredible. I'm sure he's very grateful. That's a good name
my
to.
husband actually saw Kobe Bryant out a few years ago. And he went up to Kobe, and Kobe was very approachable and says, we named our son after you. And coincidentally, my daughter's birthday's on your birthday. And he was, yeah. And he was just giving my husband a high five.
That's so cool. I think that's incredibly powerful advice is for parents. Like I think that's so important because you know what, money, we talk about it outside, we don't talk about it enough at home. And there's so many similarities, like you just mentioned. You need a support system. You need to be motivated. You need to see. It's a momentum game too, right? Like you need to see that progress, and that's very similar to just other things in life, like even
It
physical
is.
fitness, even dieting, eating right. Like it all follows the same thing. So why is it that fitness is glorified all over wherever we go, but
Oh,
financial
good
literacy
point.
is not?
Yeah, fitness is glorified, but money isn't. Isn't that interesting?
Absolutely. And you mentioned something. I mean, over the course of your career, you've seen a lot of things happen. And I'm
Yes.
sure you've had conversations with your clients over the past several decades. I mean, you look at natural disasters, you look at political changes and currents, financial crisis, the housing bubbles, and all of that. And most recently, obviously, in 2020, we have the pandemic and it's still going on. And you for sure have a lot of people coming to you saying, Cindy, I'm nervous. What does this mean for my portfolio? It's probably not the first time you're faced with these types of conversations. What do you tell people that ask you that question?
The reason I was thinking about leaving the industry was in 2003 when I was 41 and my seniors were 60 and I saw the stock market drop 30%. And I questioned my career. I went and saw my pastor. I says, I have no value. And he goes, I write about this in my book. He goes, what do you mean you have no value? I said, listen, I'll have a stock and a bond and a stock, and my clients just lost 30%. And my seniors are going to have financial problems in the future, potentially running out of money. He goes, are you honest? I said, yes. He goes, you ethical? I said, yes. He goes, go back to work. You've been in the business 16 years. Don't give it up now. I said, okay. So that was a turning point in my career. How can I build a model so that I wouldn't have to talk to a client and say, hey, listen, you just lost 35%, 40% of your money, but there's nothing I can do about it because I don't control the markets. So I went on a journey for 17 years of building strategies that could sustain myself. So last year, COVID-19, March 13th to March 23rd, the Dow drops 40%, oil goes negative, the S&P is down 30. I can't say over the air how my clients did. We didn't get any phone calls because we didn't have that same volatility. Because when the markets collapsed and you're diversified deeper than stocks and bonds, there was no phone calls. So the phone calls started in 03. They dimmed down in 08 when the credit crisis market dropped 57%. Our clients didn't even lose close to those numbers, okay? So the calls got less, and then COVID, there was barely any calls. Okay, so I was able, with my passion of trying to protect my clients from forces we had no control over, was the very reason I wanted to leave the industry. I think with the Realm model, I have something to offer now, not just my clients. If it's good enough for Yale and these big endowments to add these asset classes, it's certainly good enough for my clients, because if it's worked for them, it could potentially work for you and give you the goals of managing volatility, giving you income in retirement, and leaving you a legacy. That's been my life's work and my passion. And that's what my first book's about.
So, if I'm hearing correctly, your Realm philosophy, which is a combination of passive, active, and some alternative investments, COVID has essentially acted as a bit of like a test run for it.
Absolutely. I'm not going to get on the air and tell you what my top 50 portfolios did, because I won't be able to, but they did not call me. I didn't get any phone calls.
Well, it's one of those days when no calls is like the best thing that can happen, right?
Believe it or not, the market dropped so fast, people didn't even notice it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It dropped, at the end of the quarter they did when their statements came in, right? Because the end of the quarter, people were like, but no, it was funny because I'm like, God, we're not getting, we get calls, but not like I got calls in 2002 and 2008. Yeah, the calls have come way down because we have educated. We've taken the time to educate, and this is critical. If I just try to put you in something to make money, which of course is part of my field, that's what I do for a living. If you look at my website, I have videos, I have radio shows, I have podcasts, I have books, I have webinars. I have created content, not to help me market my clients, to help me educate my clients. So when the unexpected happens, or the black swan, like 2008 or COVID-19, that the clients are aware of risk and the level of risk they're taking for how I'm building their portfolio and constructing it.
Cindy, I want to sincerely thank you for sharing your insights with us today. They've been incredibly valuable. I've had a lot of fun speaking with you
good. I did
and
too.
learning from you. And I can't wait for your other books to come out as well that are down the line. If somebody wants to learn more about Cinergy, about yourself, or about your latest books, what's the best way for them to do that?
So there's three ways. You can go to my website. Nobody can pronunciate my last name. So Cinergy looks like Cindy, Cinergy, and I have a lot of energy. So cinergyfinancial.com. That's the first thing. Second, you can call me on our 800 number, 1-888-210 8777. Our website has our phone number. You can go to Amazon. Yes, I'm so blessed that our book was rated a Wall Street Journal bestseller. You can get Redefining Financial Literacy. It's the best $25 you're going to spend. The amount of research is in there is over 550 pieces of research. And I did collaborate with Dr. Georgie, who backed up, being a financial planner, we have to sort of back up everything we say. And that's why most planners don't write books. Because it takes a long time. And so it's a very valuable piece if you're interested in learning these political and economic forces and how it's affecting you, your money, and your future generations.
Well, thank you so much. And I highly encourage everybody to check it out. And I want to wish you good luck with your book.
Thank you.
Continue helping your clients. And also thank you for your mission of raising awareness about financial literacy. It's really, really important.
Oh, thank you so much, Vlad, for having me today.
All right. Have a good one, Cindy.
Okay, you take care.